Hello, and welcome to Let's Talk Transformation. Today's guest, Simon Copsey, and I will be looking at simplifying complex systems. Often, when complexity is the default, as it is today, we lead as if simplicity is impossible. And this digital transformation is no exception to that. For me, that in itself holds lots of possibilities for understanding and also doing things differently. So hold that thought. Simon, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Susie. Lovely to be with you.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show, Simon. You are the Delivery and Transformation Director of Periwinkle Consulting, and you help leaders and teams, let me say, uproot avoidable work and streamline
Hmm.
their processes for agility and also to enable them and their teams to deliver faster and in an environment that allows them to be themselves. In this complex world, I'm coming back to complexity already. I do think it's necessary to constantly ask ourselves these questions of how to manage the complex systems that we all live and work in. So let's dive into those questions of how we simplify complex systems. How does upgrading ourselves as leaders, but also as parents and individuals, change everything? And how can we build communities that create real societal impact? So, what if, let's start with a what if. What if parenting, building teams, digital transformation, what if all these things shared the same map? So that's my thought question as we go into simplifying complexity. So, Simon, can you tell us about the risks of not being able to manage complexity in organizations and what complexity actually is?
Oh, I'll do my best. As you know, Susie, I have plenty to learn, and I learn from you and from others. So please jump in and kind of nudge me as well. So I guess complexity for me is where no one person can see the whole, and
Mm,
I guess we see the risks or the fallout of that every day in organizations. Whenever we have conflicts, it's often because we can't see the whole.
mm,
There's assumptions that the other side of the conflict, the other person has. Um, Often in organizations, we're trying to get to the same place.
mm,
If we zoom out far enough, we have the same goals,
mm,
um, but often we just have different ideas on how to get there. But what's more often expressed than not is, this is my idea, we should go with this.
yeah.
Um, as opposed to, this is why I think this is a good idea, but you're seeing things differently. Can you help me understand the assumptions behind your idea? Because if we're both trying to get to the same direction, if we're both
Mm,
trying to get to the same place, and we've chosen different routes to get there, there must be something you're seeing in your route, and I'm seeing in my route that's different.
mm,
But if we're going to the same place, we can probably jump in the same Uber to the same destination.
yeah.
Um, so yes, so if no one person can see the whole, there's going to be conflicts. There's going to be difficulties. There's going to be a difference between what management think they should be doing and staff should think they should be doing.
Mm.
Staff who are close to the reality, management who maybe have a different purview. So conflicts, I guess, is one of the biggest things. But then not sorting out those conflicts leads to all those other things like delivery slowing down, attrition, all the things that we really care about, Susie. But what comes up for you?
Yeah, and I was thinking about that and the impact on decision making, just, off the back of that decision making, because decisions either get made quickly and they're imposed or they don't get made.
Mm.
um, and therefore productivity, both of which are really important for businesses, but they're also really important for people. And I think, often we see productivity pretending to be complex. And actually, when we break it down, it's more simple than that, and it's just inefficient processes and workflows. I don't know what you think about that and what you see in your sort of daily work with leaders and teams.
Oh, Susie, so I was thinking, you made me think as you invited me to this, and I'm, I, I hazard a guess that when we see complexity, there's two things that we can do, right? And one is to remove the complexity.
Mm,
And there's some, we can't do that in the world. The world is always going to be too complicated
mm,
complex for us to understand. But we can remove some of the complexity, like when it comes to technical debt, over complex technical systems.
mm,
And maybe it makes sense to do that because feeling that complexity is what slows engineers down as they try and do their job, for example, or
mm,
process complexity, where
mm,
processes have outgrown their needs and we need to trim them back. So in
mm,
some cases, one action we can take in the face of complexity, knowing that we'll never, complexity will always exist, but we can trim it, is unwinding that complexity in organizations or around there. But the other one, I guess, is not trimming the complexity and just saying, okay, well, that's just a fact of life.
mm.
How can I make sure that I pay more attention to the signals that matter most? How
Mm,
can I filter out, add enabling constraints so
mm,
I kind of blinker myself to just what matters?
mm,
And that's another way of dealing with it. And that's where having a clear goal, for example, and saying anything, and I'm going down this route because you mentioned productivity. For me,
yeah.
if I that means to me progress towards a goal uh,
Mm,
from Ellie Goldratt. And so, if we believe that productivity is progress towards a goal, that kind of removes a lot of complexity. It means there's only certain things we need to focus on, which is working backwards from the goal, as Stephen Covey reminds us.
mm,
Everything else doesn't really matter. And that allows us to focus in complexity and kind of see the inherent simplicity behind it. Whereas
mm,
if we don't have a goal, if we don't have a clear goal, we will have different goals,
of course.
we get lost.
Yeah.
So, yes, I think we can either we can unwind the complexity in some cases, or we can change our filters
Mm,
so we don't get lost in the complexity. But what
mm.
comes up for you, CV? I said a lot.
Well, I think just to unpack that a little bit, both of those things are looking at leadership skills, aren't they? In terms
Mm,
of,
mm,
one, understanding what to unwind or unravel or
mm,
unentangle, let's put it that way.
yeah,
Um, and also being able to stand back from what I'm thinking, take on different perspectives and do th different things with that. So I think, my question as you were talking was, how how can we help leaders decide what to simplify first? And
mm,
and you started that explanation for me with the idea of going back to the goal,
mm,
focusing on what we said we would do, type of thing. But often leaders are stuck in old habits, and I'm leaders because I'm talking about organizations, but often humans are stuck in old habits.
yeah.
So how do you help them in your work sort of flip to a different way of thinking? Because us talking about it on a podcast is one thing,
Yeah.
but doing it in the work environment where we're pressured to deliver and,
Right.
we've got teams to run and things to do and our personal lives to manage, how do you go about that, Simon?
Oh, I appreciate it, Stevie. Yeah, thanks very much. So, I quite like the theory of constraints, the thinking process from the theory of constraints, just to
Mm,
name it.
mm,
It sounds like a mouthful, but let's go through it in simple steps. So, this came from Ellie Goldratt's desire to bring hard science to these kind of social problems,
mm,
the scientific method, if you will. And so, the first thing as we discussed, that you need to know before you can take any action to make sure it goes in the right direction is be clear on your goal and
mm,
only have one of them. You can't have multiple. If you have multiple, you're going to run in multiple directions at the same time and make
mm,
no progress,
mm,
likely. So pick your goal. What is the thing that you're trying to optimize for? What is the thing that you're trying to make progress against? Um, and the units. Yeah. Anyway, so the first one's the goal. The second one is once you and the reason of being clear here is not just being clear in your mind, but clear if you're in an organization that everyone has the same idea. Because if
mm,
we all have different ideas of what the goal is, because it's unexpressed, we're all going to be naturally running in different directions, even if in the leader's mind there is one
mm,
goal. So
mm,
it's all about being on the same page of what we're optimizing for. The second tool in their toolbox that you use after you've got a clear goal is understand is the cause and effect diagram. And the reason that
mm,
we use this at this stage is once you know where in what direction you're trying to make progress, the question becomes what are the key obstacles? There's always going to be many obstacles. Like when you go to a doctor, that you often have many symptoms.
yeah.
But in the complex world, often those many symptoms come from just a few underlying causes. So,
Mm,
cause and effect diagram helps us work backwards from all the obstacles that are in the way of us getting closer to our goal and work backwards and find that actually there's just a few causes.
mm,
And those are the areas of focus. So, it gives us even more focus than we would have had from just a goal.
mm,
Then the third tool allows us to step into action. So, I'll go into that. But yeah, working by filtering reality based on what goal we're heading towards, and then working out the key obstacles that are in the way, the causes of them, gives us a bit of focus. There's a bit more to it, but I'm
mm.
kind of curious to get your thoughts and see what's coming up for you.
I also like that idea of, so what comes to mind when I talk about complexity, but also as you were speaking, is
Mhm.
here we go, gardening. So
Yeah.
when your garden's overgrown or you buy a new house and the garden's completely overgrown, I always feel it's a little bit like that. It looks messy, big, there's no air in it, you can't see through it. And I like the idea of putting space into that system so that you can actually see what's growing, see what isn't growing, see what's stopping things from growing,
Yeah.
and generally look at. how you can nurture the ground that all those things are in so that they can grow properly. And that's what I was thinking about as you were talking about that, because I think we get lost in overwhelm, we being the human brain, so us humans, get
Yeah.
lost in overwhelm very quickly. And I think there's a lot of overwhelm today, isn't there? Particularly coming from the tech world, it changes so quickly. I was going to say AI, but it's not only AI, it's the whole digital transformation piece of everything that tech is enabling all the time means that we have to change our perspectives all the time and learn different things all the time. So that's what came up for me, Simon, as you were talking about that. And I think also innovation comes from constraints.
Mm. Yeah.
So I always like to take that view on constraints because they're also quite helpful.
Mm.
So they stop us doing things, but they also enable certain things. And that's my biggest discussion, I think, with leaders and also with myself, around being able to step back enough, Simon, to see the possibility in all that, I think.
Mm.
I mean, I don't know what you see as the biggest resistance coming from leaders and teams, because clearly we get collective resistance as well, don't we, to these things? Um, but I think for me, framing constraints as possibilities is always helpful, even if there are naysayers who go, yeah, right, no, no, no. But I still think it's an interesting angle.
Oh, Susie, you gave me so much that you could see me looking to the side and scribbling on my notepad. I'm going to try and keep it brief because I don't want to. I'm keen not to over expand the conversation when there's so much we could talk about.
I
But
know.
uh,
Well, we can do
but
two
yeah,
podcasts.
that's a dangerous offer. So the first one is gardens. I love that metaphor because what's interesting about that is like if my wife says, "Hey Simon, can you please tidy the garden?" Right? What does garden mean? To me, it's just the grassy patch, but there's the flower beds. It's a bit round the side. And the second one is, what does tidy mean?
Yeah.
What does improve mean? All this like depends on what your
Mm,
values are. And
mm.
if that goes unexpressed, what your goal is, like I like a wild garden. My wife likes a
A
very
tidy
it has a
garden.
very different it has a very different meaning of what she likes. So if we don't be clear on what the boundary is for the
Yeah.
system that we're trying to improve, and we're not clear on what the direction of improvement looks like, how can we get anywhere? And we will make a lot of we'll make a lot of progress in the direction we think is progress, but it's not productivity because it's not taking us to a shared goal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting.
completely. Um, and um, and I think technology, to your point around technology, I'm guessing that technology is changing fast, but what isn't probably changing so fast are the problems to be solved. Like users have the same needs, um, and they're fairly static. The needs
Mm,
that humans have is fairly static. But yes, I agree, when it comes to solutions to solve those needs, that's changing quite a bit. But the basic needs of users isn't really changing. It's just how
no.
we solve it is changing the tools at our disposal. Um, I think the psychology and the kind of understanding is a bit that's pretty static and important all the way through, perhaps.
Mm,
Then you mentioned
mm.
constraints, and it reminded me of like the Apollo missions and having fixed runways to uh, find out how we can kind of maximize impact on a
Mm,
particular outcome, for example. And yes, totally agree. Constraints bring creativity. I think Toyota, I'm really terribly well versed, I'm terribly versed in history, but I think Toyota
mm,
was facing that constraint in that it didn't have a huge amount of money and there wasn't a huge demand for cars. And therefore, if it took the traditional Western approach of creating loads of cars, leaving them at a lot, and then selling them when they sold, um, he would have got bankrupt very quickly. So
mm,
uh, having that limitation, they needed to do a just-in-time approach and think, how can we kind of reduce lead time? And that's led to, so I think, yeah. So I completely agree with the constraint. And the final one, forgive me, is around the resistance, right?
mm,
And that's a very key word. I think the biggest obstacle I see is assumptions held by managers,
mm,
held by leaders. I have many assumptions that are invalid, and I'm only going to discover them with time. I've discovered some, but there's many more. That's what
mm.
learning is, right?
Yeah.
Um, and as a parent as well. And then, but one thing that I think it gets conflated a little bit, perhaps I'm curious in your view, is often we believe that staff are resistant to change, but everyone loves change. I've become a father. That was my choice. Many people choose to, take up a new sport, take up a hobby, get married. All these are changes. People welcome
Mm,
change, but only if they're improvements. If they're not improvements and they're resisting change, there's something wrong with the change. either in how it's communicated and kind of how
mm,
you've involved the staff in shaping the change to make it effective. And
mm,
we can only be effective if they're involved, or because it's just wrong.
mm.
So that resistance means something. It's not the staff, it's the change, most likely. But yeah, sorry, that was a lot. We talked went from
No,
gardens to
yeah.
problems versus solutions, constraints, and resistance. What comes up for
Uh,
you?
but I like the idea of starting with gardens because it's this regenerative loop, isn't it? And I
Mm,
think reinvention of oneself, of one's business, of business models, of what one thinks is really important because, like you say, there are two speeds of change going on at the same time. The tech change, which is exponentially fast, and then the human reaction to that, which doesn't change that much.
mm,
And therein lies the it's not a problem, lies the disconnect because, like you say, we don't necessarily hate change because when we're kids, that's what we do. We're
yeah,
quite curious. We learn how to walk.
right,
We relearn how to stand. We relearn how to do this.
exactly.
And I think we're formatted by society and also by education into more of a binary understanding of the world.
Mm,
So
yes.
more complicatedness in Dave Snowden's Cynefin model as opposed to sort of the unpredictable world. But if I come back to our opening thought, Simon, which was, what if parenting, building teams, and digital transformation all share the same map? I think the human dimension is where they share this same map. And I think it's interesting you mentioned parenting. I mean, yes, you choose to be a parent, but it's still very complex, and your assumptions are blown away every day. You have to look at yourself in that mirror. And it reminds me of, what the leadership skills we need for navigating complexity, whether that is the complexity of life, the complexity of business, the complexity of our team, or just the complexity of ourselves. So
Mm,
I know we discussed parenting a little bit before the show, and I think it's really
yeah.
interesting. And you have an interesting take on this, Simon, of how parenting can sharpen our leadership skills for navigating these complex environments.
Oh, that's an invitation. I appreciate it. Sorry, I'm just appreciating what you said. The invitation I appreciate, but you mentioned a few things there that are really, duality.
Mm,
I've started to take a step into philosophy. I've never really gone there yet, but I realize it's the
mm,
father of, or the mother of science. So I realize duality comes a lot, and
mm.
so yes, completely agree. It's not either or. There's never either or in this
No,
world,
it's never as
but
binary, is
never.
it?
It's never binary.
Yeah.
But that's the root of conflicts, and that's why uprooting conflicts comes from seeing the assumptions on either side, because
Mm,
then we start to realize, oh, we don't have to go
mm,
left or right, uh,
mm,
or we can go in between.
mm,
Um, and there's a few other things here, but yeah, the map. So you talked about the human part of that is what maybe brings um, parenting, management, leadership, and these things together. I think there's a lot to it actually. It's a really wonderful way of putting it. I think the other part is the indirectness is the biggest thing for me, right?
mm,
As in when we become a parent, when we become a manager, what changes, and I failed at as a manager, and hopefully won't fail at too badly as a parent, is recognizing that we're no longer our mission isn't to succeed anymore. Our mission is to help others succeed. The
mm,
problem with that is we're not them. We can't directly experience what they're experiencing. We don't know what they need in any given situation.
mm,
Um, it's not clear,
mm,
and we can't control them. I can't control my son. Like he's not a marionette. He's not a video game avatar. Um, and the thing is that often the default I took is to, in that situation, assume what's necessary
mm,
and tell people what to do, micromanage
mm,
because we just know no better. Well, I didn't know any better, and
mm,
that wastes creativity. Um, as your team, as your family grows, you burn out,
mm,
and they're probably not going to listen anyway.
mm,
And if you try and control your child, the only way of doing that is punishments and rewards, really. And that brings me to the other point, which is you need to be clear on what your goal is. If you use both for parenting and management,
mm,
if your goal is to create a compliant child, yeah, fine, yeah, absolutely, use punishments and
mm,
rewards. Um, but if you're trying to create a child who can develop their own moral compass and get better at making their own decisions, that's where you need to introduce choice. And I'm not saying
mm.
everywhere, you
No,
don't want
no.
to introduce them to
Yeah.
unsafe situations, but um, And that's where I struggle a lot because I'm just like, oh, my kid's not doing what I want.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Mm,
this is not what I want to do right now.
mm,
But it's learning to sit with that and recognize that by giving that choice, by allowing them to choose their underwear in the morning, from a limited selection, perhaps if it's, or
mm,
you know, if there's just too many choices,
mm,
they get better at becoming that independent adult that you want them to be.
mm.
And I still have so much to learn. Anyway, that was a lot, Susie.
So I
I
think
brought
we
up. I,
all, I think we all have a lot to learn, don't we, in that respect? I
yeah.
mean, it's just constant complexity and constant evolution. But I think so are organizations these days. And as you were talking about those parenting challenges, I was thinking, one, yes, clearly that they are big challenges and they get bigger as the children get bigger. Um, but also, what does, if I translate that into a team environment, what does that mean that leaders need to be doing, Simon? So we're coming back to something you said earlier about boundaries, but being very clear about their boundaries and our boundaries as a team, what's okay, what's not okay.
Ah,
But
mm.
what other changes or shifts do you think leaders need to make to move from doing more to doing, I'm going to say doing better, although I don't want to put that judgment on it,
Oh,
to
that's
doing
good.
things in a smarter way. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, better's not a bad word because if a manager does things better, it's
Yeah.
for me the role of the manager is to magnify the impact of a team,
Mm,
multiply the impact of a team. So if they're doing a better job, they're helping the team. So that's
yeah.
fantastic. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
better's better than more for sure. So no, that's a really good question. Just to go back to make sure, because I think I misspoke before. When I talked about boundaries, I meant boundaries of the system. When we look at an organization, which part are we trying to
Mm,
optimize for? Or
mm,
which part are we trying to optimize? And if we're not clear in that distinction, we're trying to optimize toward this part towards this goal, then
mm,
we like with a garden, is it just the grassy
yeah.
patches and more than that?
Yeah.
If we're not clear on how it's nested in the wider system. We might end up optimizing the wrong bit or
Mm,
the right bits in the wrong way for the cost of the whole. But to your point, yeah, no, I love that. So how can we help teams? So I think this is where it gets really where the indirectness comes around, right? When we're what we need to recognize is in order to get more of the goal, in order to make progress against the goal, we recognize that if we work backwards from that, there's certain conditions that need to be true.
mm,
So, for example, as Ellie Goldwright reminds us, if our goal were to increase profits now in the future, we can't do that unless we provide a secure and satisfying workplace. We satisfy customers or the market. And so we recognize that in order to achieve more of the goal, there's these conditions that need to be
mm,
true to help us achieve that. And conditions is a really beautiful word because those conditions can be created in multiple different ways.
mm,
Um, so then we can kind of then work out what the tactics are. So for leaders, I think what is important to me is, what are the conditions that need to be true for the team to get close to their goal?
mm,
Once you have that, then you can start to work out how do I create those conditions. We
mm.
can't draw at the other end. We can't pull staff.
No.
We can't motivate them.
Mm,
We can't put knowledge in their head.
mm,
So the conditions that we need to create is a safe environment where they can speak up and less goes
mm,
unsaid. So we have the opportunity to see the roadblocks where they have time to learn
mm,
because that's a pillar of intrinsic motivation and it's going to be important at work because otherwise skills will become a shortage and then we'll get bottlenecks because only a few things know what matters.
mm,
And so these kind of things, if the leader is able to work out what are the conditions I need for my team to succeed, and then they can work on creating those conditions. He can go no further, or she can go no further than that.
mm,
Can't guarantee that we'll get closer to the goal, but can create conditions.
mm,
Going back to your gardening example,
mm.
well, for seeds to grow, we need water, we need light,
Yeah.
we need soil and nitrogen and those kind of things. Um, so we can't guarantee the plant will grow, but
Mm,
we can definitely increase the chances a great deal by putting the right conditions in place. Same with
mm,
teams. We can't control teams. We can't tell them what to do. We can't tell them what to do, but we can put the conditions in there to help them
mm.
succeed. That was a long answer again, Susie.
No,
Sorry. What comes up for you? I just love your questions.
but if I do that as a leader, and I completely agree with you,
Mm,
a leader's job is to create the conditions
mm,
for their team to be able to perform as well as possible. And I think a senior leader's job is to create these conditions for quality decision making to happen and for strategy to be able to be delivered. And if I look at the current trends around sort of teams of teams,
Mm,
so sort of small gardens, if you like,
mm,
how how can we create the conditions for those teams to grow together? Because I think,
mm,
if I look at the agile DevOps models, um, it's to create agility, of course, but it's also this iterative, more networked community type of
mm,
change momentum.
mm.
So, how do you see leaders enabling that or disabling that?
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Thank you for the nudge. I think so for me it goes back to the goal. Because if we work backwards from the goal, we can then work at the organization, then we can
Mm,
work at how these teams fit together in the context of that goal, and particularly when they need to work together.
mm,
So there's two options, I think. One option is to remove interdependencies.
yeah.
Ideally, if we look at the shape of the work coming into the team, the shape of the demand from the client, the customer, they should go be able to, ideally, a team should be able to go pleased to thank you with no need to interact with any other teams. Because every time we wait on another team, uh, more than half that chance for success. I can't remember what Dominica de Grandes put in her book, Making Work Visible. But the more interdependencies, the huge amount of slowdown and variation in lead times. So ideally, remove all interdependencies. So any one team can go from pleased to thank you without any uh, dependency on another team. But if we can't do that, or if we haven't got there yet, I guess the
Mm,
best thing is to understand what is the goal they're working towards, and therefore, um, what are the teams optimizing for? Because that goal that those teams are going to be working towards together,
mm,
their overarching goal between teams allows them to prioritize the same thing at the same time, and synchronize basically.
mm,
If teams aren't synchronized, it's like getting to a lift bank when one lift has just left. It's like, ah, could have waited in line. So
yeah.
ideally, you want everything to be synchronized if these teams are working together. And the only way of doing that is make sure they work towards the same goal, so they have the same prioritization algorithm. You don't want to keep reshuffling. You don't want to work the other way
Mm,
around where you work out, okay, team one, what have you got in your roadmap? Team two, what have you got in your roadmap? Okay, how do we join this together? It's like,
yeah.
oh, could have
Yeah.
worked the other way around. Work backwards from the goal, work out. There's probably a lot of work you don't need to do, first of all, across those two
Mm,
teams. And secondly, they're going to sort the roadmap in the same way if they work backwards from a goal. So you don't
yeah.
have to keep reshuffling and reshuffling and and um and ideally over time you'll see you can change the team boundaries, you can change the team responsibilities. There's ways that you can start to create the independence of the
Mm.
teams without any negative effect. But comes up to you. What comes up to you?
But I was thinking as you were talking of a more end-to-end process, the end-to-end
Mm,
value streams, which are now coming in and being enabled by digital,
mm,
in terms of data flow, but also in terms of platforms and ways of working.
mm,
And I was wondering through, I mean, there are many methodologies within Agile and DevOps, but one of them is to drive the value from one end to the other, which means that teams need to really collaborate quite differently and also work in communities
mm.
as opposed to siloed teams. And I'd be interested in your opinion on what that means for two things. One, the efficiency of the result,
Mm.
and two, the value it can create in terms of the product, but also culture change.
Ooh, I think you're seeing something that I haven't quite appreciated yet. So let me try and keep it short, so then you can go, no, Simon, that's not what I meant. There's something else there, and that's what I'm keen to get from you, Susan. For me, the whole value stream, ideally, when I say please to thank you, forgive me, that was me thinking about the whole value stream or
Mm,
value chain. And I say value chain because there's always
mm,
that recognize that there's the slowest step in a value stream is what governs the rate at which it can work. So value chain, and therefore having one team that sits across that whole value
mm,
chain is the ideal, no
mm,
interdependencies.
mm,
But where that's not the case, I think the teams need to be governed by the same goal.
mm,
Governed's the wrong word. They need to be working towards the same
mm,
goal, and that allows them to work together and cooperate towards that
mm.
goal, as opposed to conflict because they're like, no, that's not my
Yeah, yeah,
priority.
yeah,
And
yeah.
you have all this negotiation that you waste time on, and then everyone's spending more time talking about the work rather than doing the work. But stop, Simon, it's going to stop. Susie, am I getting close to what you were thinking? Tell me more about what you're thinking, please.
No, that was it. That was exactly my point in terms of, and I'd understood that the please, thank you was the value stream. That's what I had. Well, it was my assumption, and now it's been validated. So thank you for that. Uh, but I think it's interesting to see how you see teams working together and creating that value. Is there collective resistance there?
Mm,
Um, do they still try and work in silos? Because you can say something, can't you? And then say, well, this is still my budget, or this is still my team, or
yeah.
so you still get the sort of human ego-driven reactions to working in a collective way because the organization is not designed in that way often. It's still designed in sort of quite a
Mm,
rigid
yeah.
pyramid, or even if it's not a pyramid, it's still quite rigid in terms of names on organizational charts and who can do what in that culture.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I was writing something down. Like, yes, no, I totally agree. I think so. You know, there's things in organizations that get in the way of cooperation, and one of the
Mm,
ones that you're naming um, is goals.
mm,
There's also performance reviews, individual performance reviews, and bonuses. All these things get in the way, and they
mm,
encourage individualistic performance as opposed to uh, an orchestra or
mm,
working together. Um, the only way that we can do that is by removing those individual
mm,
uh, or reducing those individual um, drivers so that we can work together. So, um, yeah, that's the only thing that really comes up strongly for me that things have to change to allow those teams to work together, and that comes with potentially rethinking, profit
mm,
share instead of bonus,
mm.
thinking about the holistic, the global, as opposed to trying to optimize the parts, perhaps. But what comes up for you there?
No, because I was thinking, how could we leverage the
Hmm,
fact that teams are working in smaller entities
hmm,
because the unit of value has changed in organizations
hmm,
today. It's no longer huge departments. For me, it's
hmm,
smaller teams or even individuals, depending.
hmm,
But I wonder how we can leverage what I call the power of community, which is those
hmm,
teams of teams working together. But I think it
hmm.
needs to be intentional. And
Yeah,
today, often it isn't habitual or intentional. So I was
yeah.
wondering how you help, what you saw in organizations and how you accompanied them into a different way of thinking on that subject.
Okay. No, I appreciate it. Thank you. I think there's a lot for me to learn there, Susie, first of all.
Mm,
Yeah, I've seen communities of practice, but I've never constructed one and things like
mm,
that. So
mm,
you're way more well versed, and I'd love to hear your view. I think for me, the intentionality is when is I keep pointing this, but forgive me, it's just so important to me now. I've realized that the last couple of years is the goal, right? Working back from the goal, working out and using prerequisite logic, which is
mm,
in order to achieve this goal, what do I need? In order to achieve those things, what do I need? And working backwards just enough so you know the conditions that you need to create. And one of those is learning. But
mm,
learning isn't, learning can be achieved in multiple ways. And community of
mm,
practice is one way of sharing knowledge, but it's not right in all cases. Neither is, classroom-based learning. Neither
mm,
is,
totally.
there's lots of different things. But to understand what teams need to share knowledge in what way we need to, and to make it
Mm,
intentional, we need to work with the goal. And that would allow us to understand what are the things that don't exist that need to exist and for what reason,
mm,
in what way.
mm,
If we don't work backwards from the goal, we're not designing, we're tampering, I guess.
mm.
But yeah, what comes up for you there, Susie? I'm keen to learn from you on that one.
No, the goal is one thing, and I think just getting everybody's voice around the table.
Yeah,
And it's not always through community practice, you're right. But I think there are so many voices that remain unheard in
yeah.
organizations, well, in communities and society in general, but we're talking about organizations. So
Mm,
in organizations, and often that, we all know that innovation happens on the edges of systems, and there's a reason for that. So these silent voices or marginal voices that we never hear, often the most innovative ideas come from there.
mm,
So it doesn't have to be a community practice,
mm,
but I think it's interesting to see with what digital enables in terms of connection globally, how we can support leaders and how leaders can support themselves and others to bring more diverse voices around the table. If I look at the tech revolution, AI, and the bias that is coded into LLMs, just from the fact that there are not always diverse profiles around the table that are creating these things. I think it's the same in organizations. Policies and processes are made, defined. It's not always equitable, and there are not always the right voices around the table. So. I also like to think of the mindset of agile and DevOps and what comes with the way tech works as a lever for that in terms of culture and therefore outcome, because the iterative, more approach of understanding different perspectives before we do something leaves me with hope, Simon, that we can actually start looking at some of the systemic bias that are in systems and processes and organizations, and therefore creating a culture, to come back to something I said before, that is more accepting and therefore more productive.
Yeah, you can see me scribbling. Yeah, no, thank you. That feels good. Yeah, that feels good. I think one of the things that towards helping us unleash the creativity of our staff,
Mm,
um, so it's not wasted, um, is one tool I quite like. I'm sure there's many. Is sociocracy as
mm,
holocracy as well. You know, where we or integrated decision making, IDM. I can't remember what it stands for exactly, but it's a way of kind of putting a proposal there and shaping it, recognizing that
mm,
objections are great because they
mm.
bring forward new information,
Yeah.
going around the room so that everyone inputs and facilitation are being the by the highest paid person or anything
Mm,
like that. So those tools I like as kind of or I guess tactics. The other thing I like is a lot of the theory of constraints thinking process tools are visual.
mm.
Um, it all goes back to accepting that we'll never understand the world.
No.
We'll never understand it either as one person or as a human. We never experience it directly. And what that means is that we then start, and then if we believe everyone is good, those two things together mean that when someone says something and it's not what we expect, we look
Mm,
for the meaning behind it and go, oh,
mm,
that's interesting. And why I like the theory of constraints tool is they're visual, so that they can be debugged by other people. You can say, this is why I think what I'm thinking. This is why I think this is the diagnosis. This is where we should focus all our improvement
mm,
because of these symptoms. Because if we look at these symptoms, they're caused by this, which is caused by this, which comes down to here. And then people go, no, no, you're wrong.
mm,
That's wrong. Because they can see it and it's very clear. It's very easy to see the cause and effect logic, the
mm,
diagnosis, how it worked out. So they can improve it. Say, no, 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 that's not quite right. If we're going to not be focusing on the right thing together. So it invites viewpoints from other people to make sure that we bring together this puzzle piece, the puzzle piece as best we can of an organization, that the complexity, understand where things are coming from before we target improvement and we focus on the right thing. And then when we're kind of then creating a plan, same kind of thing, we use the same kind of logic to
mm,
get it debugged. So yes, I think it all comes back to believing people are good, recognizing the world is complex, and we'll never understand it together. And there's always another side of the story that we can't see, and that we need to hear from other people. There's assumptions there that we have that are wrong, um, and then that means that we see the need for sociocracy. Then we see the need for all these tools that you described, I think, and we pull on them. Anyway, that was a long-winded way
mm.
of saying, yes, I agree, Susie. More voices is important.
And what I take from that is we still need humans more than ever to unentangle whatever patterns we've recognized or whatever theories we've uncovered or whatever knowledge has been put in front of us, which is why I think that partnering with AI is the way forward. There's a lot of talk about the AI augmented leader. And I think that's really important. And at the same time, trying to get these diverse voices around the table of people who are building and improving these LLMs so that they can serve the whole of society and not just a part of the population.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I think I agree. I think I'm maybe a little bit more hard-nosed, maybe in that AI feels like it could weaken our thinking. It takes away the responsibility from us to do the thinking, and particularly with looking at organizations and using
Mm,
logic,
mm,
you know,
mm,
uh, which is all that we're doing. Cause and effect logic, prerequisite logic, working, either backwards from a goal or kind of
mm,
from effect to cause to effect or effect to cause.
mm,
Um, it's just deductive. It's just deductive and inductive logic. That's all we're
mm,
doing. That's all we're exercising. And we need to get better at that. That's how we understand systems through that logic.
mm.
And going to AI weakens our reasoning, weakens our ability to think. Um, it's fantastic at the right points. Um, but if we rely on it, the things that we need as leaders, the way that we need to think could get weaker, and that's, it could atrophy, and that's the bit that worries me. So don't disagree with AI for things like brainstorming,
Mm,
or using it at the right point for the things that you don't really care about getting better at,
mm,
like writing an email, fine.
mm.
But for the things that are hard, particularly thinking in inductive and deductive logic, I think it's pretty important we practice that. That's something that I think we could all, most of us could improve, perhaps. But
Mm.
yeah, is that what were you thinking?
Yeah, and I just think we need to make sure that we don't get cognitively lazy, which is, just letting it think for us. I think thinking with it is really important, and then adding what we bring from the sort of human side of our brain that it doesn't
Mm,
have, like compassion and wisdom and discernment and those type of things. It doesn't have
yeah.
that. So I think it's really important that we, as you rightly said, use it for what it's good at, so to speak, and that we
Yeah.
bring the rest still. Which brings me to one of my final questions around if you were advising leaders or parents, I feel like saying, Simon, because we're both navigating this complexity,
Mm.
who want to leave a legacy or make a difference, and I think most of us do. What would your advice be to help them scale impact in whatever they're doing, either in their team, in their family, in their community?
Ooh, I'm probably going to go with the easy one, but also I think the thing that we've come back to a lot, or I come back to a lot, is probably a bit of repetition. Forgive me, which is be clear on your goal.
Mm,
I think Alfie Kohn, when he talks, as we talked about before, I was channeling him through the conversation. And he talks about, by default, if we don't think about it as parents, our goal is to create a compliant child, create a good little boy, a good little girl. And we say they're good when they aren't creating a noise, aren't noisy on the
mm,
flight, right? We don't think about it. I
mm,
didn't think about it until I read his book.
mm,
So
mm,
for me, by default, my goal would have been to create a compliant child. But then if you go and ask parents explicitly, if you picture your kid in 18 years, where would you like them to be? They describe that all the adjectives they use are independent, self-assured,
mm.
autonomous,
Emotionally
um,
balanced.
yeah, emotionally balanced. And that's independence, and that's not compliance.
Mm,
Once you know your goal, then you can work back and say, what are the things that need to be true for that to occur? But until you know your goal, you can't do that. Same in organizations. If we don't know what our goal is, everything's a priority
mm,
all the time. We
mm,
can't focus. We can't say no. We can't work out what not to do. People burn out. People, teams get lost. People lose their sense of purpose. People go elsewhere because that's one of the intrinsic parts of motivation alongside learning.
mm.
Um, so for me, be clear on your goal, your one goal. What is the one thing you're trying to optimize for? Um, and how do you measure it? And then don't go measuring everything. Don't go worry about everything. Just work out what is your goal that you work backwards from and what needs to be true to get more of it, I think.
Thank you. I'm going to leave our listeners with looking at their goal, focusing on their goal, and deciding exactly what they want to do. Simon, thank you so much for coming and sharing your insights and your experience. Where can people find out more about you and what you do and Periwinkle Consulting?
Oh, no, I appreciate you having me, Susie. I am at curiouscoffee.club, not .com, but .club.
I love that.
Come.
Let's just stop on the Curious Coffee Club because this is a conversation Simon and I had before the show
Wow.
around creating community and impact through cups of coffee. So, can you
Mm.
just give us a little information as to what Curious Coffee Club is in terms of the history of why it's called Curious Coffee?
Oh, Susie, this is where I wish I had this really amazing story. I'm afraid I'm a late bloomer in many ways as a parent, but also as a coffee drinker. I started in my 30s. I realized it was beautiful and it helped me get into reading. Before that, I barely read a book. And so I guess I just put those things together. And at the Curious Coffee Club, there's articles and kind of recommended reading and things for anyone who's interested in helping organizations get out of their own way. But I wish there was a more beautiful story behind it.
But that story is beautiful. It's essentially about getting curious, having coffee, and understanding what type of conversations you need to have. Or that's how I read it. So I'll put the link in the show notes so that people can go and look at curiousfcoffee.club.
Thank
Simon,
you, Susie.
thank you. Thanks so much for a great conversation.
Likewise.